G'day, mate. 40 here. So remember all those beautiful words about optimizing for truth, right? Pursuing truth rather than happiness, pursuing truth rather than views, right? Those beautiful words that we had yesterday from the Decoding the Gurus, right? Well, do they really pursue truth, or do they just pursue politically correct and convenient forms of truth? So let me replay the start of this little rendition here by University of Central Queensland psychology professor Matt Brown.
In science, and he's like a postmodernist, so that's why he doesn't like the book.
Yeah, look, here's my take on that, Chris, which is that, I mean, it's very hard to beat something like this, because when you optimize for public appeal, and you focus on making that your main priority, then you are going to do better for the people than the people that are optimizing for just merely being effective or being true, right? So, you know, we have the same problem, and it's existed for years, right, with complementary and alternative medicines as opposed to conventional medicine. Conventional medicine is unpleasant, alienating, treats you like a piece of meat, doesn't feel good in any way, shape, or form. Nobody enjoys visiting a hospital. Whereas complementary and alternative medicines, all right, are optimized to make you feel good, all right, are optimized to be appealing. Then it's going to be very difficult to sort of somehow educate people or something, you know, to do anything really when you know, like if you're focused on being popular and you make that your main criteria, then you're going to come up with a product that is more appealing than the healthy option. So yeah, I think it's the same thing with academic whatever knowledge versus these pretenders, because they make it their business. I mean, apart from because it's a full-time job for them, right? Like those names, someone was asking about statisticians, right? Trevor Hasty, Leo Bryman,
David Donahoe.
Okay, so that's Professor Matt Brown from Decoding the Gurus talking about the importance of optimizing for truth. Do you put a priority on truth, or do you put a priority on something else? But there are all sorts of truths, of course, that the Decoding the Gurus guys don't want to get into, as they are leftists. And Jonathan Haidt here has an excellent little video on the different ways that the right and the left deny truth.
Instead, if you sacralize your political ideology's heroes, you cannot think straight. And this is where we are in the sciences. It's obvious that if you're a social conservative, evangelical, young earther, creationist, you probably shouldn't be going into a PhD program in biology or geology. Okay? It's just going to be really hard for you to deal with reality if you deny evolution and the age of the Earth. Okay? You shouldn't go into American history if you say America is the greatest country on Earth and it simply cannot have committed war crimes. We just don't do that. I mean, that should be a disqualification. But what about on the left? Suppose you had students coming in who deny that IQ matters. Not anymore, but for decades. It's just very uncomfortable because there are race differences in IQ. The general view is IQ is a bad test. It doesn't measure and it doesn't matter. We can't allow that IQ matters. Because IQ is heritable, we can't allow that heritability matters. Environment has to be everything. The left has always believed that environment can overcome everything else. So can you do social science if you deny heritability? You think everything is environment when it isn't? The left is full of sex difference deniers. Hormones are fine for other animals. Hormones affect behavior in other animals. But how sexist of you to suggest that male and female differences could in any way be due to the fact that they are exposed to different hormones prenatally. That just is ruled out of bounds. Now, it's not that the left denies evolution. That's fine for other animals. But evolutionary psychology? Well, that's almost sexist and racist. No, evolution didn't shape human beings. And last, the biggest area in my field is the study of stereotypes and prejudice. And it's an important social problem, but we try to solve it while not allowing anybody to even mention the largest cause of stereotypes and prejudice. There is a small research literature showing that the reason why people hold stereotypes is because they're accurate. Most stereotypes do correspond to some measurable, observable fact about the environment. Now, there are often misinterpretations. The stereotype often lingers long after the reality changes. So I'm not saying that stereotypes are perfectly accurate, but I'm saying a big part of the story is that people are really good at detecting differences between groups. We're intuitive Bayesians. We pick up frequencies. You can't stop the brain from doing this. So suppose you had a whole group of people coming into social psychology who were the equivalent of young Earth creationists, who say, I'm going to study stereotyping and prejudice but I'm going to just rule in advance that there are no differences between groups. And now I'm going to study what's left. That's where we are. So my point is that all groups value the truth. Okay? Every ideological group believes it values the truth. All groups hold something sacred. And if you hold something sacred, then as I've said, no trade-offs, no nuance. That means that your sacred values are going to conflict with the truth. And when that happens, all groups are the same. They throw truth under the bus, and they go with their sacred values. And that's where we are. So I hope I've shown you that political homogeneity, now that we no longer have conservatives in some academic fields, it's a problem. It's bad for our science. We need to clean up our act. We talk a lot about the value of diversity. Intellectual diversity is the most important kind of diversity there could be. And I hope finally I've answered for you why it is that social justice has a bad name in much of the country. So how could anyone not want social justice? I'm not denying that selfishness and racism are part of it, but I'm saying that there are some valid moral objections. Why do conservatives distrust scientists, and especially social scientists? Well, there are some slight differences in need for cognition. There are some reasons why liberals will predominate. But a lot of the distrust, as I've shown you, is because there are objections to the politicization of science, especially the social sciences. I hope then that I have inspired the Duke University family towards ever greater achievements in social justice, which I hope will mean it's time for re-examination. The 60s are over and done with. We have a new set of challenges, much more about class than race. Let's think about what it means. What does justice really mean in this day and age? And let's think really carefully before we claim to enlist science as being on our side. Thank you very much. Science based on what your attitudes are towards science and scientists. And, well, just to show it very briefly here, but
we'll show an image on the video.
What it basically shows is that the black bars along the top, the black diamonds, are the numbers for liberals, and they stay relatively stable over the last 30 or 40 years. The bar for conservatives was basically at the same level as the liberals in the 60s and 70s, and then beginning in the 90s, it begins to go down while the liberal graph goes up a little bit. And so it is true that in the United States, conservatives they have a lower opinion of science, and there are more obvious places where they deny it. I'm often asked when I speak on the book by people on the left, well, yeah, all that you've said is very interesting, but isn't it still true that our view is based on science and reason and evidence, and theirs are just based on faith and hatred? And I have to say, well, hold on a second here. Every group holds things sacred. Every group values the truth. And when the truth and the sacred objects conflict, every group throws truth under the bus. And we've seen this in evolution. Obviously, the Christian right denies evolution because it threatens the creationist account. But the left has denied evolution, certainly since the 70s.
Now, that might surprise some people, and both the left and the right are heterogeneous. So, but expand upon your statement that the left have denied evolution. Who among the left has denied evolution?
Well, nobody denies that it happened for other animals. And nobody denies that evolution shaped our bodies. Nobody on the left denies this. But when Ed Wilson suggested that it also seems to have shaped human behavior, whoa, you're opening the door to saying there could be sex differences, there could be race differences. And since what the left sacralizes is equality and anti-racism, they plant their stake in the ground. They say there are no sex differences, there are no race differences. Now, let the evidence sort itself out how it will. These are absolutes. So in my field of psychology, for 30, 40 years, we had evolution deniers. Nobody said that they couldn't believe that evolution affected us. Just it's such a high bar that you couldn't argue that evolution mattered. They'd always say, well, that's a just so story. Prove it. Run the experiment.
So one way to disbelieve something or to reject it, basically, is not to say that it's flat out false, but to set the bar so high, basically, that nobody can...
Exactly. So that happened for evolution, sociobiology, evolutionary psychology, anything that suggested sex differences, anything that suggests race differences, anything that seems to blame the victim. So the Moynihan report is a famous example where Pat Moynihan, looking at the causes of black poverty, talked about the importance of the black family, and he was derided as a racist. So if you know what a group holds sacred, you see where they go crazy. And I just want to read you a quote from this article, actually this quote by an essay, from an interview with the author. This blew me away, and this to me was the opening to understanding what's going on. So they say, this is a quote from Gordon Gosha, G-A-U-C-H-A-T. Public opinion on science in Europe and Japan skews differently than in the United States, Gosha said. There, skepticism about the scientific community usually comes from the left. The reason may be that the issues on the scientific forefront in Europe, genetically modified food, nuclear power, tend to push liberals' buttons, while those in the United States, climate change, stem cell research, tend to bother conservatives more. So it's an historical artifact that in the US, it is conservatives who deny science more, but that's not because there's something essential about liberalism or conservatism.
So one thing we've done is we've taken what seems to be a political difference, and is a political difference in any particular time and place, and explains the entire pattern in terms of universal human psychology, basically, what anyone will do when they sacralize something or not. But to me, this creates a dilemma, because surely we need to understand what we love and cherish most, much more than what we don't care about. Mm-hmm. And so is it the case, in your opinion, that...
Okay, so when you make something sacred, you make it much more difficult you make it essentially impossible to honestly, objectively investigated. The more things you hold sacred, the fewer things you can honestly investigate. So abortion has become a sacred issue in the United States on both the pro and anti side. So it's therefore much more difficult to compromise about it. You can't compromise over something sacred. Russia invading Ukraine, trying to settle that conflict, it's being portrayed as a battle between good and evil. When you have a battle between good and evil, it's a lot harder to study it objectively and to try to reach some kind of compromise and solution. So you make something sacred more difficult to study, verging on the impossible to study it objectively, to pursue truth, and also much more difficult to compromise over. So I have a lot of things in my life that I consider sacred, but I have kind of a split personality because I believe you have to live in the dance in your in-group, right? Participate fully in your in-group, but also take time to step outside your in-group and look at how your words and your deeds and your actions and the rhetoric and the teachings and the beliefs and the scriptures of your particular in-group, how they look from the outside. So I both hold things sacred and step outside of everything that is sacred and try to see things from multiple points of view. So that's how I reconcile my devotion to the sacred on the one hand and my devotion to truth on the other hand. But while you're holding something sacred, you can't fully investigate the truth. When you're fully investigating the truth, you can't hold something sacred. So it's something of a schizophrenic dance. Now, I don't think the Decoding the Gurus guys have really come to terms with this.
Yeah. What did I say?
There's a fella called Arthur Dent who's posted a load of questions, which are just the names of stuff.
Oh, they're in the questions. I posted that in the questions. Okay, that's my entry in the chat. Sorry. But yeah, like those guys, right? They're not on Twitter, right? They don't have a podcast. They don't whatever, spend their time networking with people like Elon Musk or whatever. They're doing real serious shit and you've never heard of them, because why would you? There's no reason for you to have. So it's always going to be someone like that, sad, who writes a popular book that sounds really good, that's easy to that feels compelling. You can see lots of applications in your own life. You can see how, wow, this is going to help me invest in the stock market. It's got all of the features to it. I'm not even saying Nassim Taled's books are necessarily bad. They're not. I don't think Black Swan was not a bad book, but it is like any of those popular books. It's written for popular appeal. Whereas these guys are actually pushing forward the boundaries of statistics. And if you actually wanted to know something true about how statistics or reasoning with probability and machine learning works, you're better off asking those guys. But
so the left consistently denies science when it comes to IQ, group differences in IQ, the heritability of IQ, predilections to crime, and other traits, how almost all human traits have significant heritability through genes. The left denies that evolution shapes how people think and how people behave. It denies the stereotype accuracy. Most stereotypes have a great deal of accuracy. The left denies sex differences, racial differences, frequently religious, cultural, and ethnic differences. So how and why does the left deny these things? Because it makes sacred certain marginalized groups, such as Blacks, Jews, gays, the transgender, right? That's what woke means, is that you take this marginalized group and you render it sacred and therefore immune from public criticism and also immune from objective analysis. So that's how we've gotten into the mess we're in today. This is Eric Kaufman talking to the scholar Noah Kahl about wokeness. Eric Kaufman is the author of the great book White Shift.
Is in a sentence, is the sacralization of historically marginalized race, gender, and sexual identity groups. So the making sacred of these groups as totems that cannot be offended, and any disparity in outcome between them and the oppressor group has to be a result of structural power differentials, which we can call structural racism, patriarchy, or heteronormativity. So that's my definition of wokeness. And it's all, again, has that sort of religious connotation around sacred totems that you can't offend. But I think it's the scaffolding for a more sort of secular ideology, I guess, which I would call cultural socialism, which is really about equalizing self-esteem, power, resources between identity groups, and preventing harm, including emotional harm, such as being offended, to those identity groups, including microscopic emotional harms known as microaggressions.
Right. So do you use the term wokeness yourself? Or because there's a lot of different terms that seem to mean approximately the same thing. There's left-wing identity politics, regressive leftism, cultural Marxism. You just mentioned one yourself, cultural socialism. What's your preferred nomenclature here?
Well, I'm really hoping, and this will be hopefully in the title of my next book, is to get cultural socialism to be the sort of consensus go-to term. I think there are too many terms, and some of them are used too loosely. So, for example, even though I think there are orthodoxies around climate change and around COVID. I don't think those, I would put those outside the definition of what I call wokeness, which I think I center it very much around the Holy Trinity, race, gender, sexuality. And I think we have to also understand that this is a form of socialism. It is a form of the same sort of oppressor-oppressed utopian worldview that was there in socialism. And it's just been transposed onto identity categories.
But it's interesting, isn't it, that some of the prominent critics of wokeness are old school leftists, people who would classify themselves as socialists, along with, of course, many on the right who criticize wokeness. Does that stand against your preference for cultural socialism as a term?
I don't think it does. I think that to the extent that these old-time socialists are attached to historical materialism, they are right that this is clearly a departure from historical materialism and class and the mode of production and all of that kind of Marxist analysis. The only thing I would say is a couple of things. One is that just first of all, on a descriptive level, people's self-identification on a left-right scale is the strongest predictor of where they are on issues of cancel culture and critical race theory, for example. So just descriptively, there's a very high correlation between being on the left and being pro-woke. The other thing is, if you understand socialism to mean egalitarianism, and this idea to weaken the strong and strengthen the weak, although I think the strengthen the weak component is actually pretty flimsy. But essentially, if you understand it to be about that kind of leveling and this idea of seeing the world as a power struggle between the oppressor and the oppressed, and you have to overthrow the oppressor with this vanguard of oppressed, and then you will bring forth this new 1,000-year reign of Christ on earth, not quite, but a kind of secular version of that millennium, then I think it is very much in that sort of Marxist mode. Now, of course, it does draw on certain elements that were weaker in particularly pre-World War I.
That's the main point. Wokeness means left, right? The further left you are, the more likely you are to be woke. And one sentence definition of wokeness is making marginalized groups such as blacks, gays, and the transgendered, making them sacred, therefore immune from objective analysis and the sort of ordinary criticism that we give to other groups. And the woke still have considerable power on Twitter. They got Steve Saylor banned recently. This is Mickey Collins.
I think they're applying it fairly.
Well, that was my
but
question.
Yet it is not applied fairly.
So that will change under Musk, right? He's definitely not a woke millennial. He hates woke people. He hates them. Okay? He's made that clear. He hates them.
It's very, I'm not sure he's fired all the woke people who are under him.
Well, give him time.
Okay, give him time. But like, there's a guy named Steve Saylor who nobody can link to because they think he's a racist, okay? He survived, Jack. He survived the entire pre-Musk regime of Twitter. He did not survive 2 months under Musk. He's been suspended, okay?
I doubt Musk has control yet. Now, you are hearing complaints. You are hearing complaints about, we're hearing on both sides now. I have no idea what's going on. But look, give him time. If there's one thing he wants to get control of, it's this.
Okay, so a great conversation here that I'm linking in the video description between scholar Noah Carl and the university professor Eric Kaufman, author of White Shift. Here he's talking about wokeness.
Marxism was not particularly humanitarian. And there's no question that that humanitarian kind of let's be kind and gentle ethos that's an enormous part of this ideology, and that is foreign to pre-World War I or even pre-World War II Marxism. And so again,
yeah, so you got this banal wokeness, which is all about harm reduction. Let's just be kind and gentle. And you hear a lot of this rhetoric from, again, Professor Matt Brown of Decoding the Gurus, from the liberal left, that all they want when it comes to social content moderation is let's just be kind. All right? Can't we just be kind, guys? Let's just be kind. Let's just practice harm reduction. And this is Martin Bailey stuff, right? Who can object to kindness? Who can object to harm reduction? But it is the more socially acceptable face of wokeness, which wants to ever restrict the things that we can say and do in life. There is this totalitarian element in leftism. It needs to be continually educating people out of their traditional folk ways. It needs to be continually bullying people. It needs to be continually, shaping people, bringing them out of their hidebound traditions and their ignorant and bigoted ways. And so once they educate you on gay marriage, then they have to educate you and bully you on the transgendered. And then, who knows what they have. But it is this ongoing, continual cultural, educational crusade. That's what it means to be on the left, that they feel more enlightened than you are. And so they constantly have to be on alert for all instances of bigotry and ignorance and start educating you. So those are the essential psychological underpinnings of leftism and wokeism.
And they have a point. But I still think that, yes, there's a fusion of elements that are close to liberalism and social democracy. But I think the best way of thinking about it is as a cultural form of socialism, even if it lacks one or two of the elements of traditional Marxian socialism.
So just to clarify then, you do prefer cultural socialism to wokeness or woke?
Well, I think woke is a useful shorthand, and it more describes the religious, the sort of ritual, mythical, sacred elements that surround the ideology. So it's an appendage, it's a sort of sacred canopy around the fundamental philosophy that is cultural socialism. So that's how I would distinguish these two, although they are intimately linked. And I have no real problem with people using wokeness as long as they're not using it just to sort of decry anything they don't believe in. So I think leading it over into the climate and vaccine issue, I think is a misuse, a stretching of the concept.
Yeah, I would agree with you that some people who we might describe as woke object to the term woke. They see it as a sort of cudgel, a term of abuse without much real content. What would you say to that?
I think it very much has content if used in a consistent way. So I think if we're using it to say this is about sacred totems, historically marginalized race, gender, and sexual minority groups which cannot be offended in any way because these are the sacred gods. And there's a hierarchy, by the way. But one of the reasons that women and trans are in such a bitter battle, feminists and gender critical feminists and trans, is it's not 100% clear who has more victim points. Probably the trans have slight edge in the sort of victim hierarchy, so they're slightly up the totem pole. They would never be as high as, say, an indigenous community or African Americans on that totem pole. So there is actually a victim hierarchy as well, which I think orders the entire religion.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would also add that two reasons to prefer woke or to defend it as a...
So listen to how Matt Brown essentially describes his preferred content moderation on Twitter and other social media. Just to be positive, be kind, be nice, right? That's how they break it down.
Discourse river.
Yeah. I think that's true. Probably more important for them personally than for society at large. Because as you say, there's heaps of ways to poison the discourse and stay well within the terms of service. But I guess.
So notice how hygienic they want to create life, right? How safe they want to create life. They're always on alert for poisoning the discourse, which means talking about things they don't want to talk about, things that they don't want said. Okay, because it might, cause harm to these various sacred groups. So people who are traditional and conservative, we understand that human nature is not basically good, that life is inherently messy and frequently brutal and frequently a fight to the death conflict. And so we have much less of a desire to sanitize life. We have much less of a desire to make it hygienic. We don't make it a priority to educate people. We're not, primarily on alert for ignorance and bigotry. Our greatest concern, because of the inherent messiness of life and the inherent non-good nature of human beings, is to be alert for disorder and contagion, right? Those are the right-wing concerns. We are much more relaxed about the messiness of life. We're not nearly concerned about misinformation and disinformation and the polluting of the discourse, right? What people like Matt Brown and Coding the Gurus guys consider polluting the discourse is discourse where their side is not in charge, right? Where their left-wing institutions are not running the show. That's polluted discourse.
My experience when Trump was around tweeting, like I didn't follow him. I think I probably had him muted, if not blocked. But it was unavoidable. You just couldn't avoid Trump discourse, and that's kind of the fault of all the people retweeting him or taking.
See, these guys want a hygienic life. They don't want to have to interact with any ideas, any perceptions that are not congenial to them. So they are objecting to the pollution of the discourse, meaning if they have to interact with stuff that they don't like, that is kind of anathema to their particular hero system. But their particular hero system is just another hero system. I've got my hero system, you've got yours, they have theirs, but they talk all the time effectively in terms of objective good and evil, and what is nice and what is kind and what is true, what is good. but there's a highly partisan worldview that underlays that outlook, and they don't seem to have much awareness of that.
A snapshot and dunking in someone, and it sort of just sucks the oxygen out of everything and just made it all stupider.
See, they don't like, dunking. They don't like the messiness of life. They don't like, men challenging men. They don't like fighting. They don't like verbal fighting. They don't like physical fighting. They don't like the natural passions unleashed. They are a transmutation of Protestant morality, of Christian reform outlook, where Christianity is virtually entirely internalized, whereas a Christianity of the heart, where you've gotten rid of rituals and priests and hierarchies, it's just you and God, and you have your whole soul changed, your whole inner being changed. You've had a baptism of the heart, and now you no longer want to say nasty things. You no longer want to do nasty things, that you've been purified from nasty thoughts of lust. I mean, these guys think it's shocking and absurd and horrifying that Elon Musk would tweet a picture of a young damsel in a compromising position and portray, Donald Trump like a priest trying to fight his urge to plunder the young woman. That a CEO of a major publication would share a meme that's so spicy, that's so earthy, right? That violates their antiseptic, hygienic perspective on life. These sorts of things can be done ethically, but behind closed doors, under certain situations, all right, you can have ethical BDSM and ethical pickup and ethical swinging from this liberal left perspective, but you can't be too earthy about these things. You can't be too lustful. You can't allow the natural passions much room. Conservatives tend to be much more at ease with the fact that people have natural passions. Conservatives and traditionalists tend to be much more at ease with the basic fact that most men will risk everything for the chance of, sex with an attractive young woman, right? And precisely because they have this skeptical view of human nature, they think it's so important to build institutions, situations, social mores, customs, a moral climate, and say biblically infused communities to try to corral this rather base and passionate nature of man. Now, people on the left, highly educated people like the professors from Decoding the Gurus, they think that everyone should internalize this ethic that they have, where we become reflexive, meaning we consider how everything we say and do is appearing to different persons and groups and communities and institutions that we may interact with. So this is much more courtier morality. So you go to court and you're constantly judging your behavior, how it affect all the different members of the court, as opposed to an aristocratic morality where a man's home is his castle and he gets to say what he wants to say in his own home. So from a traditional and conservative perspective, people should be much more free to say what they think, even if some group or some person may be negatively affected. That's more of the traditional, lord of the manor morality, as opposed to courtier morality. But Decoding the Gurus, they want everyone to have this highly disciplined, highly reflexive, highly hygienic approach to life. Harm reduction. Why can't we all be nice and positive?
And more antagonistic and boring. So that I think tends to be the effect of poor moderation for the typical user like.
And this is a very common I get. The voices of the Decoding the Gurus guys make my skin crawl. Not sure why exactly, because you are hearing the voice of the disembodied, outside the natural passions, men who have become so disciplined, so reflexive, have this understanding of themselves as, leading a particularly elevated type of discourse, that they, what it sounds like, to transcend the natural passions and to be highly disciplined about everything they say, to take into consideration, how every single person might hear what they're talking about, and how it then might have repercussions, particularly on, say, marginalized communities, right? So this is the voice of liberalism. See, liberalism and conservatism aren't primarily political ideologies, they are ways of being. So conservatives and trads are much more comfortable in their body and accepting that they have base, nasty desires, that men want to bang, that men want honor, men frequently want fame, men want excitement, men want to beat other men. And these are like natural passions that particularly men have. And then women have their own nasty passions that women are very tempted by, any man who's more powerful that they think they have a chance at. Women are very tempted to make that transition, that women are primarily devoted to, what's good for me and for my family, for the people I care about. That's how they consider, every issue in life. So both men and women have, are filled with selfish desires, with natural passions, which aren't very hygienic, right? Which aren't very nice. The act of sex is not usually a very nice one. There's usually an element of violence in good sex, in passionate sex. And so conservatives and traditionalists are much more at ease with the violent, messy nature of life, of human beings, that we're not basically good, that we're not basically hygienic, and that we're driven by frequently very nasty passions, which we would like religion, society, community to elevate us to, a better way of being. Two very different perspectives on the self here.
Meaningful term. One that.
Whoops, wrong link. Back to Decoding the Gurus.
Me.
Yeah, although I again, I have sympathy for that position, but I kind of feel at the same time that while there are accounts that just amplify Trump, right, and that claim that the left-wing media ecosystem loves Trump because it gets them more like subscriptions and stuff, I think that is true to a certain extent, but it also
like Trump is the male ego. Trump is the male id. Like Trump bangs, right? When his wife, is just given birth, he's out banging Stormy Daniels. Trump is just filled with his natural passions, and he's not particularly ashamed or embarrassed about them. All right. So from a traditionalist perspective, let's say you're an evangelical Christian or an Orthodox Jew, you understand men like Donald Trump, and you don't worship them, you don't venerate them, you don't necessarily want your kids to be like them, but you understand men who are all about honor, vainglory, self-advancement, self-assertion, banging, having status, controlling the population, controlling the conversation. We understand these natural passions, and we're much more at ease with them. While from the left-wing perspective, all right, these natural passions are frightening. They're a symptom of a world going wrong. It's just polluting the discourse. It's it's unhygienic. It's dirty. It's disgusting. It's messy. We need to clean this up. We need people to be much more disciplined, to take much more care at what they have to say. And so you're listening to a couple of professors who, when they speak, are taking into account that their students might hear this, that their peers in academia might hear this, that their parents might hear this, that their community might hear this, that their employers might hear this, that their former professors might hear this. And so everything they're saying is reflexive, is carefully moderated and modulated, and highly disciplined, and very careful not to give unnecessary offense.
Overlooks that, like, you can't ignore Trump in the modern political environment. He's like hugely important, right? He's, in essence, he's captured and then maybe most of the Republican mainstream platform in America now. And in the same way, Steve Bannon or a lot of the gurus that we cover, I wish, Matt, I really wish they stayed fringe, and that, we could dissect them as unusual oddities in the cultural environment. But like a figure like Andrew Tate shouldn't have millions of followers and shouldn't be somebody that, like, Elon Musk cares about enough to reinstate, but they are. And that's the bit that kind of gets to me, because I think you can't, you and I can choose to mute and block Trump or any of the figures that are coming back, but their effect on the discourse will remain, whether or not we see it. Like it's doing its thing out there, and yeah, that's the bit where I'm kind of like, I have sympathy for the people saying, "Oh, don't just give Trump or Elon their daily attention hit, right? Just ignore them. They're just playing up to the camera. They're being the naughty kid boy in the classroom who wants attention, but at the same time, they do stuff, you know, and they kind of like amplify conspiracy theories, or they you know, encourage people to try and take power back during handovers of power, or whatever the case might be.
No, I hear you. In many ways, that's the.
And question from the chat: why do liberals find it easy to accept unhygienic practices such as monkeypox sex? Because it is done by a sacred group, by gay men, and you're not allowed to criticize gay men. They are sacred. So if this was being done by heterosexual Christians, all right, they'd be appalled and they'd be leading the fight against it. So when black rappers, you know, simulate rape and do all sorts of edgy things, liberals understand it as the expressions of a marginalized, persecuted, oppressed community, and we have to understand and see it with nuance. But when Donald Trump says about women who are sexually interested in him, you grab them by the pussy, all right, well, that's Donald Trump being, you know, a rapist advocating sexual violence. So if a black rapper was to say that, they would understand it, they provide nuance, they provide context, because the black rapper is a member of a sacred group. But Donald Trump, unfortunately, is not a member of a sacred group, so he does not get that free pass. Now, also a comment in the chat, why does Luke not set up Judah for Sabbath meals? So different friends are good at different things. I am not someone to set you up with Sabbath meals. It's not you, Judah. It's not something I really do for anyone. I'm not someone who sets people up for dates. I not generally, you know, bringing people together. I'm not organizing parties. I'm not, you know, hosting people at my home. Different people feel comfortable doing different things. So some friends are great in one area, but they suck in other areas. So I certainly suck in many different areas of hospitality. Now, on the other hand, I can give an Alexander technique lesson, you know, like nobody else. So we have to accept people for the genre that they are in, and my genre is not the hospitality genre. All right, you're not going to see me on The White Lotus season 3, right, playing a hotel manager, you know, helping you check in and asking you about your trip. Right, that's not really me. That's not really authentic to who I am. Also, I have no idea how you're going to behave at these Sabbath meals. So
The rationale for moderation. It's not that, you know, it's vitally important to stop a particular person from saying something. It's rather that them saying what they do, it almost requires people to respond, and just derails the discourse, and can make doesn't matter if it's a Reddit thread or even the mainstream news, it just makes everything worse. So if you care about having any kind of ecosystem where you know, positive and beneficial discourse is going on, the sort of discourse that people want to be a part of.
Okay, so what does he mean by positive and beneficial discourse, the type of discourse that people want to be a part of? He means woke discourse. That's essentially what he means. This is the banal version of woke, that we just want harm reduction. We just want kindness and goodness and positivity, right? That's what he's articulating. He's using the Botton-Maley strategy of presenting the most socially acceptable form of woke ideology as just banal goodness. This is just banal woke ideology. But what he really means is shutting down discussion of, say, IQ differences, racial differences, male-female differences, genetic predisposition to almost every human behavior. like anything that's inconvenient, particularly for the sacred groups that compose the woke ideology, meaning blacks, Jews, gays, the transgendered, the LGBTQ plus community, right? All these different groups, Mexican Americans, Puerto Ricans, right? These are all sacred groups who cannot be looked at objectively and cannot be held to the same standards that you hold everyone else. But they boil it down to just, did you get that? It's just banal wokeism. Like, why can't we just have positive, pleasant conversations that most people want to be a part of? Most people who have his left-wing ideology want to be a part of these sanitized, hygienic discussions, right? Not trads, not conservatives, not even centrists, all right? He's talking about his own hygienic, sanitized preferences for nice, positive discussions with essentially fellow wokesters.
Then some kind of moderation is required. I guess the thing that I hope is that these sorts of news dramas that are coming along encourages all of us to sort of develop our ideas a little bit around the notion of moderation.
They don't like these news dramas. They don't want to even have a vigorous discussion over what Donald Trump or Elon Musk are saying, because it's not sanitized, and it's not hygienic, and it reeks too much of the natural base passions, right? They don't want to face up to human nature, which is not basically good, which is not naturally predisposed towards the sanitary and the hygienic, but is instead messy, competitive, selfish, self-seeking, inconsiderate, dishonest, fearful, lustful, right? That is the basic nature of human beings, but they don't want to face up to that because they think everyone should be as elevated, as rational, as reflexive, as disciplined, as hygienic as they are in their discourse.
And platforming and all of that stuff. Like going back in the day, a friend of mine on Twitter, Carl History Boomer, had a little survey which he was talking about Father Coughlin in the 1930s. 1930s radio personality. His speeches were blatantly anti-Semitic, and he was sympathetic to Hitler and Mussolini, and he was forced off radio by 1940. So you've got these modern day Father Coughlins who are around, equally unpleasant, equally nasty. There are places for them to go, like 4chan, but I think it's quite right that they that a platform.
No, these people with traditionalist views, they're just unpleasant and nasty. I'm just curious, can someone be, say, critical of Jews and not be unpleasant and not be nasty? Can someone be critical of all the sacred groups, such as homosexuals, the transgendered, blacks, Puerto Ricans, Mexicans? Can someone be critical of any of these sacred groups and not be a horrible, nasty, brutish, medieval type of person? No, I don't think so, not in this worldview.
Like Twitter, that wants to be a place that people want to be in.
Twitter, wants to be a place that people want to be in. All sorts of people want to be in a Twitter that is more wide open. Twitter has more users now than ever, has more discussions now than ever. But those on the left who want a more sanitized type of life, who want to be in denial of basic human passions and human nature, they may not want to participate as much in Twitter, and it upsets them that a major avenue for elite discourse has been hijacked by the plebs, by the working class and their heroic representative, Elon Musk. So he keeps talking about, just create a nice, positive space that people want to be in. Well, which people? What do you mean by nice? What do you mean by positive? Right? From, say, a traditional Christian perspective, any speech that denies Jesus is the Christ and Lord and the Son of God, right? That's untrue and not nice. So your definition of nice and your definition of truth and your definition of positivity is going to depend upon where you're coming from. So these two professors on Decoding the Gurus, they're coming from a secular left-wing perspective, and so they want a discourse that is sanitized, secular, left wing, and the more passionate type of discourse is just too messy for them.
Gets rid of them. So you got these two opposing poles of the debate, where on one hand you have this kind of ban everything that I don't like, ban everything that we can find some argument that it's harmful or whatever, and then at the other end it's just free speech forever. You can never stop. You should always platform everything equally. The freer the speech is, the better it is. And neither of those things are right. The solution we've kind of got at the moment is that we have these big tech platforms that are verging on monopolistic, but are still in private hands. So it is ultimately legally a matter for the private owners of those companies. But as private companies, you make the argument that they should and can implement any kind of terms of service, any kind of moderation program that they prefer. If people don't like it, they can go to another platform. I'm actually I think even though the comeback to that is, oh, they've got a monopoly, so there's nowhere else to go, so it's essentially a public utility. But on the other hand, the motivation for a normal business owner, platform runner, is that you want to maximize engagement, you want to maximize users. And so you don't really have an agenda to sort of change social norms normally, if it was being
normally
as a normal business. Yes. So, throw back to that comment about people.
So if you're operating in the media or social media, you don't have a desire to change social norms. Well, the media is pretty left wing in its agenda. So yeah, I think the media and Silicon Valley and big tech do very much have a desire to change social norms. Also, their desire is not to maximize users. Elon Musk is doing that. Their desire, one would think, would be to make a profit. But if you have a desire to make a profit, that doesn't mean you don't have other desires as well, such as to change the discourse, shape the discourse, to promote what you think of as goodness and truth and positivity in the world, which will usually be part of the banal section of wokeness, right? The banal aspect of wokeness is we just want harm reduction. We just want niceness and goodness and kindness to reign. So here's more from Noah Carl and Eric Kaufman on wokeness.
But people to whom it refers at one point referred to themselves as woke. Up until around 2018, people would describe themselves as woke unironically. So you can't claim something's an insult if people are using it to describe themselves, or at least it's harder to do so. And secondly, it's nice and short and can be used in adjectival and noun forms.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is. There are obviously two different things. One is how useful is it analytically as a type concept. In terms of constructing type concepts in social theory, and there's a whole nomenclature around that. I think it is useful to describe, as I mentioned, the kind of religious aspect of cultural socialism. But in addition, is it useful as a shorthand politically? Yeah, I mean, it's a bit like you have some shorthands which break down a little bit on closer inspection, but I do think this is actually reasonably robust, can be defined, you could create a scale where you measure it. Now, what I would say is there are kind of two aspects to it. You have, because of this, I mean, it's united around this sacralization of these groups. But the ideology clearly, there's two fronts. One is the progressive illiberalism, the way it impinges on the Enlightenment ideas of free speech, due process, equal treatment, objective truth. That's one prong. The other prong is where it impinges on majority group identities or male identities or national identities, which is the so-called critical race theory prong. And they are somewhat distinct in their effects, but I think they stem from the same underlying drive in the ideology, which is what Jonathan Haidt would call the Equality and Care Harm Foundation.
Yeah. I guess one argument for cultural socialism is that you might be hard pressed to get woke into an academic paper.
Yes, yeah, you would. And
reviewers might object.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, although I think even cultural socialism, there's people on Twitter trying to say, "Oh, well, that's a euphemism for cultural Marxism, which is some Nazi trope," or
right.
Sort of. They're attempting to cancel. It's just the irony of attempting to cancel a term to describe a cancel culture. So it's but yeah, we have to be able to have a term. But of course, as you say, I mean, it's very hard for academia to study this stuff. They have to tiptoe around this.
Yeah, that's a point I've tried to make in a couple of my Substack articles. That this is arguably the most profound social change that's happened in this timescale, in recent.
Okay, we've had some great moments this week, so let's just review a couple of highlights from the week that was. Hard against the left is crazy and just seeking drama, and oh, why won't they leave our left-wing institutions alone? Why won't they leave our left-wing dominated institutions alone? Why won't they leave academia alone? Why won't the right leave the mainstream media alone? Why won't the right leave Hollywood alone? Why won't the right wing leave non-governmental organizations alone? Why are they so crazy and mean? Why are they so yearning for drama? Oh, I just wish they left left-wing domination of our major institutions. I just wish they left all that alone. Why won't they just leave the left in charge, running all our major institutions? Why won't they just leave the left alone? Why won't they leave our gay military alone? Why won't they leave our medical institutions alone? Why won't they lead our governing elites alone? Why do they have to be so mean to Dr. Fauci? Why do they have to criticize doctors who only want to render gender affirming care? Why do they want to forbid gender affirming care? Why do they want to make gender affirming care illegal? Why won't they leave our elites alone? Why do they have to be so big and mean and cruel and all into the drama and the crazy? Why would they leave the left alone? Wow, powerful, powerful stuff.
Black lives matter to you? Do black lives matter to you? Do black lives matter, hey, Karen? Fucking white piece of shit, you little fucking tootsie ass bitch! Oh yeah, you wanna fucking go, Karen? No! No! Until black lives matter! Until black lives matter, no life matters! Black, white, yellow... That is not our fight! Until black lives mean something to this country? No. No.
Okay, we've had some good times on this show. Let's get back to the highbrow education here from Eric Kaufman speaking with Noah Carl about wokeness.
In history, if not ever. I mean, it's amazing how dramatically things shifted in only 5 or 10 years. And the idea of not even having a term for this is remarkable.
Yeah, and you can go to an entire major social sciences conference and not see anything on this issue. Now, there was a panel at the APSA, which was the virtual APSA, which I was on. There was a paper by Pippa Norris.
Yes, I know that one.
You saw her paper. Yeah. And there's actually, I was down in, I was in California. I met Jack Citron in Berkeley and Morris Levy at the University of Southern California. They're doing work on progressive liberalism, but how they can't use a term like woke. I don't think they've used that term. I mean, it's all about.
Okay, we've had some good commentary in the chat from My Trail of Disgrace. He says, I normally like the Irish accent, but with Chris Kavanagh from Decoding the Gurus, he has a cuck tone and timbre that seems to be becoming more prevalent there. So your ideology, the way you think, all right, is going to affect your voice. How you are in your body, your relationship to yourself is going to affect your political choices and your voice. So other comments in the chat. How much do I know about Rudolf Steiner? I think a little bit, but very little. Ultimate test will be whether files concerning activist groups like the Anti-Defamation League, Southern Poverty Law Center will be released by Elon Musk. Will we get those files? Also Antifa files and connections between these groups. Elon Musk is already hard banning or re-entrenching old bans against more nationalist people, groups, and external links than previously. Musk will submit to the ADL and the Southern Poverty Law Center, says the chat. Okay, let's get back to this academic discussion here between Noah Carl, Eric Kaufman on the origins of woke.
Rising intolerance or absolutism, or there are ways you can kind of tiptoe towards it, but of course they're the only ones that are doing anything, in this entire.
Yeah.
That tells you something about who's in academia. That there's so little interest.
Okay, well, enough about nomenclature then. So, what's your theory as to where wokeness came from?
So I think it's very interesting. I think there is this broader ideology I call left modernism, which is a fusion, if you like, of cultural modernism, which is the idea of being anti-traditional, anti-bourgeois. So modern art is an example, modern architecture, getting away from form and getting away from reflection, and it's about the new and the different. So that's the cultural thrust, which is associated with bohemianism and also alternative lifestyles. That is a much older, goes right back to the Fourierism of the 19th century and the anarchism. But then this cultural socialism stuff, I think, is post-1960s, actually. I mean, you had some mild concern for, if we talk about identity groups, I mean, yes, you had your classical liberal attempt at equal rights for women and African Americans and so on, but it's not until we get to the mid-1960s that we start to see something like Susan Sontag writing in Partisan Review, which is an established left liberal magazine of the New York intellectuals, 1966, saying, the white race is a cancer on the planet, and essentially the U.S. is a deeply racist, inevitably. I can't remember the exact quote, but that just comes out of nowhere. And what's occurring is that you have white leftists who are borrowing the outlook of black power radicals, who have this tradition of talking about white devils and so on that goes back to the early 50s. And then you also have the anti-colonial struggles and people like Fanon, which I think is a very important, Miles' 1961 book, Wretched of the Earth, this anti-colonial struggle and taking on board, white leftists taking on board the anti-colonial and black power perspectives to really sort of ramp up their rhetoric around white guilt and the anti-white. And I think that's kind of a very important step. Now, it's building loosely on a kind of older anti-WASP tradition that goes back to the young intellectuals of World War I. But that anti-WASP tradition was more or less saying, Anglo-Protestants are parochial and boring, and they have no culture, and they're uninteresting, and they don't drink, and they don't dance. Okay, that's a critique of your own group from a kind of cultural aesthetic point of view. It wasn't so much, white Protestants are oppressors, and they're a cancer on the planet. That is taking it really into new territory. And once that occurs, you then get the radical feminist movement, and you then get the gay movement after the 1969 Stonewall riots, and you get the new identity politics piggybacking on this initial black power template. So I'm dating that from sort of mid 1960s, late 1960s, the emergence. And my view is actually once this paradigm emerges, everything we've seen is just the outworking of that logic. It's nothing really new. Now there are some new bits around the psychotherapeutic culture, which infuses and blends in with this. So we get this talk, this concept creep of bullying and trauma and all of the, which is the ancestor of microaggressions.
Right, so just why can't we just be nice and be positive? All right, big news from Buffalo, pretty shocking. Scrutiny mounts over Buffalo's response to deadly blizzard. This is the Washington Post.
This news story was written by Justin Sundell, Karen Brolyard, and Holly Bailey. Scrutiny mounts over Buffalo's response to deadly blizzard. Buffalo, the city of Buffalo's response to the massive blizzard that left at least 37 people across the region dead, came under growing attack Wednesday, as emergency responders continued to search for survivors and plows moved many mountains of snow that kept the city under a driving ban for a sixth consecutive day. Speaking at a daily briefing, Mark Polenkars, the executive of Erie County, which includes Buffalo, slammed city leaders for failing to clear streets quickly and accused Mayor Byron W. Brown's administration of being disengaged in the coordinated local and state response. Polenkars said the county took over cleanup in one-third of Buffalo and had discussed with state officials the possibility of assuming responsibility for all plowing inside city limits during future large storms. "We have an elected officials call every morning, and the city of Buffalo was not on it," Polenkars said. He added, "The mayor is not going to be happy to hear about it, but storm, after storm, after storm, after storm, the city, unfortunately, is the last one to be opened, and that shouldn't be the case. It's embarrassing, to tell you the truth." Brown, speaking at a separate briefing minutes later, deflected the accusations, emphasizing that Buffalo was the hardest-hit area of a historic storm. He said Polenkars had not expressed concerns to him and insisted there was no feud between the two. "People have been working around the clock since the beginning."
So I'm not sure why Buffalo is so incompetent, but I'm wondering if it has anything to do with why Atlanta is so incompetent. So Atlanta hosted what was it, the 1996 Olympic Games, and it was the worst run Olympic Games in the last 80 years. When there's an inch or two of snow in Atlanta, just the highways shut down. Travel largely shuts down in Atlanta just because an inch or two of snow. Not exactly sure why Atlanta and Buffalo are so incompetent. I'm just scratching my head. I think there are some similarities in these cities, but I can't quite put my finger on why these cities can't provide basic services to their citizens. Like why are Buffalo and Atlanta so incompetent? I just feel like it's on my fingertips. Okay, where did wokeness come
And that's
from?
coming in
Eric
in the
Kaufman.
sort of new age, Esalen Institute, human potential, all that stuff is feeding into it. This humanist psychotherapeutic movement fuses in with the new left, starting with, the first racial sensitivity training is in the late 60s, early 70s, moving through to the 80s and building up steam. So yeah, I think that's where I trace this
Right.
from. And
Okay, and so you can hear this banal version of wokeness here in the discussion of the Decoding the Gurus guys, Professors Chris Kavanaugh and Matt Brown, a couple of psychologists, and their desire for harm reduction in social content moderation.
Like Musk buying these platforms because they can be another mechanism to wield political influence. But ultimately, if we want that kind of thing to change, then you have to do what the government traditionally does in the face of a monopoly utility, which is that you nationalize the thing, and nobody is gonna. That's not going to happen, right? So it's an interesting. It's a problem. It's an interesting. I don't want to say problem. It's a challenge to think about this clearly. The sort of stuff that I see on Twitter or the takes is kind of just free speech forever, or pearl clutching and hand wringing about how harmful saying such and such is.
Yeah, free speech forever. I mean, how primitive is that? We can't have that.
Applicable, like, more broadly in saying that, well, so if Twitter became profitable through, like, and what Elon describes just sounds a little bit terrible, right? Like, it sounds like he's basically going to make a two-tier Twitter system, the like free accounts and the paid ones, and the experience for the non-paid accounts is designed to get actively worse, right? Like your thing will be deboosted, and he's essentially saying we're going to allow all the absolute dregs of worst things to exist on the unpaid tier, and like anybody that wants to be seen by bigger accounts or to not have to deal with all the terrible people, just pay $8 a month. And maybe that will work because people are so addicted to Twitter that it would. But like at the minute, his blue tick is an anti-status symbol. Now he's kind of succeeded in making it a amongst liberal types.
So a blue tick now on Twitter is an anti-status symbol. This is following up on that Financial Times columnist who urged people to go off Twitter because it's low status, because the Democratic Party has increasingly become the party of our dominant institutions. So the Democratic Party has become the right in that it is increasingly defending the status quo and defending our dominant institutions. The Republican Party has become the party of the worker and the dissidents who want to overthrow our established institutions. So the right's become the left, and the left become the right. So these two professors, they're on the left. They're part of the clique that dominates our institutions, and they see the barbarians at the gates, and they're not very happy that the barbarians are at the gates and that they have someone like Elon Musk who's fighting for them.
Something that people are a little bit ashamed to have now. So that's the problem about tying it to partisanship, right? Like it almost feels like if he instigates it and he gives the option to not turn on the blue tick, that lots of people will do that. They will pay the $8, but they don't want the outward symbol of like endorsing it. So yeah, that's it. It's not the end of the world, but it is a bit like the social media Ghostbusters thing, the analogy that we talked about, just releasing the vaults and all the slimers and like groomers, like just flying all. And Jordan Peterson, tweeted like 60 tweets every 4 minutes. What's this article? What the hell is Justin Trudeau up to? He said what? Like, I don't think that's good for anyone, least of all Jordan. Like, I don't think it's good for him either. But I also don't think it's the end of the world or the fall of democracy. I just think it's a millionaire playing with his new Lamborghini in public, and it's not really what's that word? Like it's no good for anyone. Doesn't look good for him. It's not good for us or the people that are like salivating over Daddy Musk and everything. You know, Alexandros must be in a constant state of arousal at the minute, like just waiting. He's got his ultimate daddy is here, like Elon, and then he brought back Jordan, and Brett is still, you know, there trying to get Dr. Rollergator released. So yeah.
Well, personally, I hope it all goes. I don't think it will, but I hope it all goes down in flames, because then I'll.
Yeah, he wants it all to go down in flames. Can't have so much free speech going around. So, question: how am I liking the CPAP in this environment? I did not bring my CPAP with me to Tatham Sands, so it's scary. Like last night at about 11 p.m., I woke up gasping for breath, and when I just lay down with my head on a pillow, I couldn't get any breath, so I had to essentially lie down like this on 3 pillows. Then my nasal passages started opening up, but didn't bring my CPAP with me from Sydney to Tatham. It's negatively affected my quality of sleep. So CPAP can be annoying, and sometimes I take it off because I get so annoyed with it. But if I leave it on, overwhelmingly, I get better quality sleep. But I'm not being crippled by its absence. But there are those scary moments where I just like wake up gasping for breath and have to adjust my pillows and my seating and sleeping arrangement so that I can get some breath again. It's not a lot of fun. So I miss my CPAP. Also, because I did not lose the weight that I expected to lose because I've been eating so much ice cream, right? That also is negatively affecting my sleep apnea. Oy, to be human.
Stop frittering away too much time on it.
That's what some people hope. But so like, this is our Musk takes Twitter message in a bottle, right? Now notice Matt and I have not said that the sky is falling, or that these accounts being reactivated, it fundamentally changes everything. Like that's it. The course. No, the disinformation peddlers were there. They were already, like James Lindsay wasn't on Twitter anymore, so he wasn't in me and Matt's headspace, but he's become like an integrated part now of the right-wing ecosystems. Like he's still going around Turning Point USA conventions and giving speeches about groomers or going on Bannon's War Room or whatever, right? We are just not paying attention to him, but you will see their influence in, the right-wing politics because it's all there. And yeah, so it's not the end of the world. It's not a good thing. And Matt is hoping Twitter burns down. I just like it to continue with I'd like Musk to have, and I don't want this, but like Musk just play with his fucking squeezy toy in public until he gets bored with it, and then set up that moderation council or whatever that he hinted at, which he obviously is completely not used. And that's also a good indication he's just a liar. he just doesn't have because he said before anybody's let back, we're going to create a balanced, nonpartisan moderation council, and they'll, be involved in all decisions. And then a week later, he's just like, fuck Trump back. And, so, but he might in the end actually create something like that. He might get bored and then create it. And it might, this is my optimistic take, that you might see more transparency and stuff. I don't think you will, but that to me would be a good outcome. He gets bored and fucks off to do whatever his next outrage thing is, and Twitter improves slightly, but I don't think that's where it's going to head. I think we're just stuck on it being his chew toy for the next couple of years at least. And if it becomes a cesspit of 4chan standards, people will leave. They will eventually, if it becomes, Kanye West is just spouting anti-Semitism all over the place, and then other accounts get the message that it's okay to do that. It'll get attention. And I also think that it's quite likely, if there is a political events or shootings, violent events, which get associated with figures and being spread on Twitter, that'll end up with like in front of Congress or governments calling in Musk and other people to testify. So they don't like that. But this is what happens to the social media platforms. Like, Mark Zuckerberg doesn't want to go to Congress all the time, right? But he's been there quite often trying to justify things. So Elon Musk will be doing that at some point in the future as well.
Yeah. I guess I'm probably a little bit stronger than you on the view that it really doesn't matter all that much. Like if you search for the word Jew on Twitter, you will find no end of anti-Semitic accounts. Probably many of them will be getting bopped on the head and knocked out every now and again. But there's no end of disgusting stuff on Twitter should you look for it, right? But you know, it does, just on purely technical grounds, it does give you the power to block and mute away both. And I don't bother blocking much because I don't need to, but I would if an account was particularly annoying. And really the only thing, so I just don't follow bad accounts. So, but then the only thing that is going to be affecting you, I suppose, is the people that are in your circle, the people that you do follow, screenshotting and saying, look how terrible such and such is, and talking about that instead of something more interesting, like the French Revolution. Really into the French Revolution at the moment. We should all be talking about the French Revolution.
I'm but the sentiment, yes, the specific example, yeah. But Matt, to punctuate or what's that thing, like to just illustrate the point of everything we've been saying, I just noticed that this is what Elon Musk has just tweeted out. So for people who can't see the video, it is a image and it has a prostitute or woman in undress and a kind of monk figure trying to resist temptation, and it's labeled like Donald Trump as the monkish person, and the Twitter bird is placed over the genitals of the woman in a provocative position. Now, this was tweeted by Elon Musk, right? But this is supposed to be like an adult person, but it's just a good illustration that he's just a shit posting troll now, right? That's what he is, and yeah, you're muted.
Yes, of course, and it is funny, by the way, that he really does want Donald Trump.
So he's absolutely scandalized. He's shocked. It's just so inappropriate for a CEO to tweet something saucy, to tweet something edgy. All right. So this comes from that liberal left desire to sanitize life, and we should all be highly considerate of every possible reaction to anything we say and do, so that we never, in particular, harm or bother or upset or cause any negative feelings for the sacred marginalized communities, Jews, blacks, gays, Puerto Ricans, the transgendered, etc. So here is Eric Kaufman, Noah Kahl on the origins of this wokeness. And so you just heard the banal presentation of woke, which is, we just want harm reduction. We just want positivity and kindness and niceness. That's all we mean, right? That's the banal presentation of woke.
Of course, part of the context of this is the failure, perceived failure of the old white working class to rise up in Western countries, and the people like Marcuse and C. Wright Mills and others who are turning away from the working class towards, hey, we need a new agent of radical social change, and that's going to be the third world lumpen proletariat rising up against the colonizer, or it is the the inner city Black American population plus the students, and it was this shift, I think, that's really behind this.
So I think what you've done is point out that a lot of the intellectual basis for wokeism goes back further than one might suppose, all the way back to the 60s even. But my own experience was that I went to university and everything was more or less as I expected it to be. And then I guess it was when around the time I began my doctoral studies that I started to notice, the emergence of cancel culture and very extreme opinions about race and sex and trans and so on, i.e. the emergence of what I would really identify as wokeness. And indeed, David Rosado and Zach Goldberg have shown with their graphs of newspaper mentions of woke terms and terms like racism and sexism that there was really a kind of woke hockey stick around 2010, 2011, 2012, where the phenomenon really took off. So if the intellectual basis goes back to the 60s, why did everything take off in around 2010, 2011?
Well, if you look at Rosado's...
Okay, just a quick little note here on Twitter, that wicked place filled with unhygienic tweets. Richard Hanina tweets, dog breeds, which in some cases have only been separated from each other by centuries or even decades, as opposed to human subspecies, which have been separated from each other for tens of thousands of years. Dog breeds apparently differ in intelligence and personality. So apparently different types of dogs have different gifts, pose different degrees of threat, that most deaths caused by dogs just come from two particular breeds of dogs. So some dogs much smarter than other dogs. I wonder if there could possibly any connection between, say, dog breeds and different types of Homo sapiens who evolved separately over hundreds of thousands of years. Is it possible that they may have evolved different traits, different levels of intelligence, different levels of predispositions towards violence?
Article where he compares academic abstracts to news articles. I think he has 75 million academic abstracts. So this is from academic papers summarizing what's in the paper. And then he has 25 million news articles from mainstream media. What you see is actually, if you take racism and sexism, just as two terms, woke terms, those were already running at a very fair clip starting in the 70s and 80s. And what occurs is actually the media catches up, converges in the 2010s. So they were lagging, and then suddenly they converge on those terms. So academia was already there in the 70s and 80s. And that's, again, getting to my point, which is that this was already current in academia, and the media just suddenly caught up. And there's a couple of reasons. One is social media connects academics and journalists in a way that hadn't been true. And also the new kind of journalism that is clickbait-based rather than classified ad-based. It's graduates from elite universities more than some sort of gumshoe hack who worked his way up. For all of those reasons, you get this infusion, this cross-fertilization, and the media just catches up really in the 2010s. But that's not the origin. The origin is in academia, goes back a lot further, and the interest goes back a lot further. Now, of course, it's all about scaling up. I say this is a quantitative, not a qualitative shift. Now, I can remember, because I am older than you, already in the late 80s, early 90s, when I went to university, I can remember political correctness. You could not easily express a skeptical view on immigration. That would be extremely difficult at that time. Now, you could say, well, you weren't being put out of a job. Yeah, there wasn't a social media that they could sort of smear you on social media, but these events and incidents were happening, and I'll just give you a few milestones. So 1965, the Moynihan Report on the Black Family is shelved by the Johnson administration because it seemed to be, again, too hot to handle, because it's saying, hey, we've got to actually start thinking about this problem of the breakdown of the Black family, even though actually the out-of-wedlock birth rate back then was ridiculously low amongst African Americans. I think it was only around 20 or 25%, which would be seen as magnificent today. But 1965, and then you have other marks on the road. Arthur Jensen, 1969, there was an open letter by many of his colleagues to get his article retracted from, I think, the Harvard publication. And then E.O. Wilson in 1975, and then you had, being attacked by his colleagues for political reasons, talking about, the evolutionary basis of human behavior and psychology. And then you have James Coleman, the American sociologist, who, because he's saying that busing is actually producing white flight, there are people picketing his American Sociological Association speech with kind of Nazi signs. So, and there are always a number of these events going on, just that the frequency wasn't as high as it later becomes. So I don't think it all started with Nicholas Christakis in 2015. That is the beginning of an increase in amplitude, but you can find episodes. One happened in 1995. I always recounted the University of British Columbia. The political science department was utterly paralyzed by these non-specific allegations of pervasive systemic racism and sexism. And of course, there were no actual individuals or events. And there was this $200,000 consultant that came in and took all these statements. And in the end, it just devolved into this big joke. But just to say that all the doors were open, and I think they've been open since the mid-60s. It's just doors. It's just a matter of the supply side. How many activists are able to get organized and push on these open doors? Because I don't think there was really any resistance, even in my early days. And in the late 80s, early 90s, I didn't see any real resistance to this.
Yeah, I mean, you're certainly right that prominent academics have been getting cancelled for decades. Michael Woodley and I have a paper on this relating to intelligence research, where we kind of chronicle all the major controversies in the field going back to the 60s. And in addition to Arthur Jensen, there was William Shockley and Philip Rushton, Charles Murray, of course, and many others. But it does.
Yeah, I was going to say, I remember because Rushton was at Western, where I went to University of Western Ontario, and I remember the debate he had with David Suzuki. And now, of course, it's interesting that went ahead, right? I mean, there was a lot of people who were saying it shouldn't have gone ahead. Now, you could say, well, that meant cancel culture was weaker. I'm not sure. I don't necessarily think that that's the case. I think it's just that the number of people that were mobilized to shut it down was too small. But I don't think the sentiment, the views that he was an unacceptable person and shouldn't be speaking. I don't think that view was really any different. It's just that they didn't have the power to shut it down or the organization to shut it down.
So one impression I got from looking into the history of controversies in intelligence research is that students have always been very radical, and they haven't necessarily gotten that much more radical in respect of their attitudes on campus, but that academics have become substantially more willing to join with the students in professing very radical viewpoints and acting upon them. Does that fit with your experience? Or
I think, again, this is a quantitative shift. So there's no question, even back in the late 60s with, Black Panthers occupying buildings armed with rifles and striking for a year until, all of these crazy things that were happening in the late 60s, there were academics who supported that. But I think the balance, most academics were opposed. And so whereas I think today you might get a different tilt. So I think it's all about the relative numbers. We know that academia in the mid 60s was about 1.5 on the left and 1 on the right. And it's now 6-1 in the US and about 5-1 in Britain. And in the social sciences, it's gone from 3-1 to 12, 13, 14-1. So the tilt is just much more extreme, which is why I think there's just more support and less resistance. Yeah, you do have episodes in the 60s where the faculty would vote against the student position and to restore order. And I'm just skeptical whether that would occur nowadays.
Me too. The disciplines where woke activism is most pronounced, i.e. gender and race studies and other similar disciplines, were not as well developed back in the 60s as they are now. I assume they comprised a smaller share of the total faculty. Is that?
Oh yeah,
right?
Yeah, and it's very interesting though to look at the origins. You're probably aware of this, right? I mean, the University of San Francisco, there was essentially the students, radical black and perhaps some white students for democratic societies. They struck at the University of San Francisco, 1968, demanding 50 Black Studies positions and all of that any Black student be admitted. And they were at this for a year, and they got most of what they wanted. And the same thing occurs at a number of other universities. In Cornell, that was a demand. So the birth of the grievance studies programs is explicitly and nakedly political. It was by force, not by, oh, look, there's a lot of demand from students for this kind of program, so we should cater to it. No, it was by force. It was very political. And yeah, it very much gathers steam and builds up. And that, of course, then produces more graduates who can staff the unfolding EDI bureaucracy. And this is all about producing more minions, more supply, which I think is critical, is a rising supply side.
Yeah.
More academics tilts the balance in academia further and further to the left. And yeah, it's all about building up supply. I just think the doors were always open because people didn't have a good reply to, hey, we want 50 Black Studies position. What's your answer to that? If you disagree with that, you were racist.
Okay, that's Eric Kaufman, author of the terrific book White Shift. It's now 3:55 p.m. Friday afternoon in Tennant Sands, Queensland, Australia, December 30th. I'm going to say bye-bye for 2022. Bye-bye.